Let's talk a little bit about networks of queues in the Intro to Probability Models by Sheldon Ross book. That's chapter 8.4. So what's a primary application of networks of queuing stations? Well, most people would experience it at, what would you say? How about the Department of Motor Vehicles or Secretary of State office, where you get in line to talk to someone, get told you're in the wrong line, go stand in another line for a while, then they tell you go to this other line to hand over your money or whatever. They might also occur in a factory where things wait to get processed by this machine and then wait to get processed by that machine. So it turns out if jobs arrive according to a Poisson process from outside and eventually leave, and if all nodes have exponential service, and if a backup at one queue doesn't jam service at any other queues, and a few more assumptions, then we can treat each queue independently. This reminds me of a study that some hospital had backups in the emergency room, and they found out that the problem was due to a low number of people just to move patients from the ER to the main hospital when they got admitted to the main hospital. So places you wouldn't expect the backups to occur can actually be the main problem, and hiring more people just to wheel stretchers around is not as expensive as hiring more patients, more nurses or more doctors, right? So yay for queuing studies. Some queuing networks just have jobs circulate without arriving or leaving, which sounds a little weird, but some factories work that way. You can solve those in software. You might have heard of Kanban or Kanban systems or constant work in process systems. So if you're in manufacturing and you're curious about that, email me and let me know. We can talk about project ideas. If you have non-exponential service times, but only a single server, we'd call that an MG1 situation, then you need to know the standard deviation of the service times, and from that you can compute the squared coefficient of variation, which is the standard deviation divided by the mean, and then square that. And there's this nice formula called the Variability Utilization Time, or VUT equation. 1 plus squared coefficient variation divided by 2, that's the variability term, times rho over 1 minus rho, that's the utilization term, we've already seen that from MM1, times 1 over mu, that's the time scale, and that tells you what WQ is. So that's also called the Polachek-Khinchin formula. It's exact. It tells us that more variability hurts, the larger that squared coefficient of variation is for service, the longer the wait times. And if you've heard about the inspection paradox, you might recognize this 1 plus squared coefficient of variation over 2, which is part of the reason we talk about the inspection paradox. Well, let's talk about some other fun things. There are approximations for GG1 servers, but there's no exact formulas. There are approximations for GGK systems, multi-server general service distribution, but again, no exact formulas. Appointment-based queuing is different entirely than Poisson arrival kind of queuing, because people are deliberately scheduled to be arriving 15 minutes apart or something. It's a fact of life in a lot of appointment-based systems that no-shows are a problem. Either people forget or people just can't get time off their jobs to make an appointment. I've heard from my own doctor or dentist that some clinics ended up triple booking appointment slots just to have reasonable server utilization. To be clear, I'm not blaming people in this situation who can't show up. They just have very few options. There's not much academic work done on this. Some doctors' offices and dentist offices are leaning towards not having appointments made like 2 weeks out and just saying, if you need an appointment, call us that day and we will have a service time available for, we'll have a slot available for you. That's called advanced access. So if you wanted to do a project on that, let me know. We could go back and talk about how time of day arrivals affect all the work we're doing. For most call center models, if your calls happen fairly quickly compared to how quickly the arrival rate changes, then you can usually break it into hour-long segments and just treat it as a constant call arrival rate in each hour. If calls last like 2 hours on average, then you need to hire a queuing theorist to get better answers. What we usually do is forecast the arrival rate curve, decide how many servers in each time block, and then decide on how many people each shift, thinking about lunch breaks and coffee breaks, a shift being like an 8-hour time block. So that's a scheduling problem. We do that in the optimization class, math419 or math560. And then you have to decide which people work which shift based on seniority and avoiding clopening and stuff like that. There's all kinds of software out there for this. Discrete event simulation can handle really complicated things. I think I had shown one called AnyLogic. You can do multi-server queues in Excel, but it's really not a pleasant Excel setup. So if you really have to do it, you can use this Informs Transactions on Education article about doing multi-server queues in Excel. Let's talk about some interesting bigger issues. If you add servers to improve service, then fewer people get tired and leave, and your servers might get busier, which means you have to add more servers, right? So it can be kind of a bad spiral. So it's almost a game theory thing where, like, if people know that you won't be very busy at a certain time of day, they'll tend to call you then, and then you have to add more servers then. So to what extent do you want to add more servers just to make your customers happy? And at what point is adding more servers just not economically feasible because the increased happiness of your customers won't pay for the extra servers? So that's another thing to think about. One more issue we can talk about, back to kind of basic stochastic processes, another theorem has to do with who's doing the observing. Suppose we have one arrival per hour exactly every hour, so exactly at 9 a.m., exactly at 10 a.m., etc. So we would call that deterministic arrivals. Let's say service takes exactly 59 minutes. This is a deterministic arrivals, deterministic service queue. It's simple, but it's boring. How busy is the server? If you ask the server how many minutes of each hour do you work, they would say, I work 59 out of 60 minutes each hour, so I am 98% busy. But if you ask the customers how busy is the server, they say, we never saw the server busy. Every customer says, when I got there, the server was not busy. And when I left, the server was not busy except for me leaving. So that's a big discrepancy between how busy the server feels and how busy the arriving customers see the server. So it turns out that for most practical cases, that doesn't happen. And in particular, it doesn't happen when arrivals are Poisson. So there's a theorem called Poisson arrivals C time averages, which has the initials PASTA. So that's the PASTA theorem, which means we don't need to be too careful about how we compute average waiting times and stuff. You can just take the averages of the people arriving if they're arriving according to a Poisson process. So that one theorem makes life a lot harder and makes life a lot easier. And in a lot of cases, we just don't even think about it because it's just naturally true, and we just do the averages we would expect to do. So that's our queuing theory overview.